Far away in one quiet corner of the galaxy, there was a small alien civilization that lived peacefully among shining stars. Their worlds were filled with beauty and harmony. They were not a race of warriors or conquerors. They were gentle beings who loved peace, nature, and art. They believed that the universe was a place meant for understanding and kindness, not war. Their people spent their days painting skies, composing soft music, growing beautiful gardens, and healing the sick. They had doctors who could cure diseases with light and sound, and architects who built floating cities above calm oceans. Their hearts were pure and they trusted easily. They had lived in peace for so long that the idea of battle, of blood and fire, had become something from old legends, stories told to children before sleep. But one day, their peace shattered. Without warning, dark ships appeared in their skies. At first, they thought it was a visit, maybe travelers from another world. But soon the truth became clear. These were not visitors. They were invaders. The new arrivals came with weapons, fire, and greed. They wanted to take everything, their land, their resources, even their people. The aliens who had lived in peace for centuries could not understand such cruelty. Their defenses were weak, their ships were slow, and their weapons were old and small. They had never built machines of war because they never believed they would need them. The invaders struck fast. Cities that once shined with light and art were now burning. Great towers crumbled into dust. The skies, once full of singing birds and floating gardens, filled with thick black smoke. Families ran for their lives. Mothers cried out for their children, and elders watched their homes vanish in flames. Entire towns disappeared overnight. The once blue rivers turned red with destruction. The people who had believed so deeply in peace were now facing the end of their civilization. They tried to talk to the invaders. They sent messages of peace, asking for understanding, offering trade and gifts. But the invaders only laughed. To them, kindness was weakness. They crushed every attempt at peace, showing no mercy. Those who surrendered were taken as slaves. Those who resisted were destroyed. The small alien world that had once known only love and harmony was being erased from existence. In their final days, when all seemed lost, the leaders of the civilization gathered in their last safe place, a small moon orbiting their dying planet. There, surrounded by fear and sorrow, they made one last decision. They would send a message into the universe, a plea, a cry for help. They had no idea if anyone would hear it or if anyone even cared, but they had to try. It was all they had left. The engineers and scientists worked through the night building a powerful transmitter. It was old and fragile, but it could reach far, far across the galaxy. When it was ready, they gathered around it. The leader, an old scholar with kind eyes, spoke into the microphone. His voice trembled as he spoke, but his words were full of hope. To whoever hears this, he said, we are a peaceful people. Our worlds are under attack. Our cities are burning. Our children are dying. Please, help us. We cannot fight them. We only wish to live. The message echoed through the stars, traveling faster than light, passing planets and systems, crossing the deep silence of space. The people watched the transmitter's light blink, each flash carrying their desperate hope. Some prayed. Others held hands and cried quietly. They didn't know who would hear them, or if anyone would care. Their world was almost gone, but this signal, this final act, made them feel they had done something. They had not given up completely. Days passed, then weeks. The invaders continued their conquest, destroying everything they could find. The small moon where the survivors hid trembled under enemy fire. Supplies were running out. Hope was fading fast. Many believed that no one had heard their message. That maybe the universe was too big, too empty, too uncaring to notice one dying race. But even then, some refused to give up hope. Someone will come, one mother told her child. Someone will hear us. The child looked up at the dark sky where stars shined faintly through the smoke and whispered, "Please, someone help us." It was a whisper that carried the pain of billions. It was a soundless prayer that crossed galaxies, a spark of hope sent into endless darkness. The people had no idea where their message would go or what kind of beings might hear it. For all they knew, it could vanish into nothing. But somewhere, far away on a blue world filled with oceans and storms, a signal flickered across a human listening post. The faint, broken words reached human ears. The prayer had been heard. Back on the small alien moon, the survivors didn't yet know this. They sat in the cold silence, waiting for the end. Fires burned on the planet below, lighting up the night like dying stars. The people looked down at their world, once beautiful, now broken, and tears filled their eyes. They remembered songs sung by their ancestors, songs about hope, about the kindness of the universe. Maybe, just maybe, those songs were true. Maybe someone out there still cared. They didn't ask for revenge. They didn't ask for power. They only wanted life, for their children to see the sunrise again, for their world to heal. But in their innocence, they didn't realize that the help they had called for might not come as gentle hands or soothing voices. It might come as thunder. The message continued its journey through the galaxy, echoing across the dark. And while the invaders laughed and celebrated their easy victory, far beyond their reach, something ancient and powerful had begun to stir. A world that knew what it meant to suffer, to fight, to rise again from ruin, had heard the call. But for now, the small alien race waited in silence, unaware of what was coming. They sat among the ruins, whispering to the stars. Their prayer was simple but powerful, born from pain and desperation. Please, someone help us. And though they could not see it yet, that plea would soon change everything. The signal that was sent into the deep silence of space finally reached a distant blue planet, Earth, a world unlike any other. A planet born in storms, shaped by chaos and tempered by struggle. To live on Earth had never been easy. Its people had faced endless challenges, from natural disasters to wars, from hunger to plagues, from darkness to fire. Every generation had fought just to survive, and through that endless battle, humanity had learned one thing above all: survival demands strength. When the faint alien message reached Earth, it was first picked up by a deep space listening post orbiting the moon. The technicians thought it was just noise, a fragment of static from a dying star. But as the computers translated the signal, the words became clear. Please, help us, our worlds are burning. The room fell silent. Even the humming machines seemed to stop. Those words carried a desperation that no one could ignore. It wasn't just a message. It was a cry from a civilization standing on the edge of extinction. The discovery spread quickly. Within hours, the signal was transmitted to Earth's major space agencies and government networks. Scientists, linguists, and military officers all gathered to confirm one unbelievable truth. Intelligent life beyond Earth had called for help. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe. But that realization brought not celebration, it brought decision. What should be done? Meetings began immediately across the globe. Some leaders saw it as an opportunity for peace and diplomacy. They spoke about communication, treaties, and cooperation. They imagined a future where humans and aliens could unite, share knowledge, and grow together. They wanted to send words and not weapons. Messages, not armies. We must approach with care, one diplomat said during a meeting in Geneva. If they are peaceful, we should not respond with aggression. But not everyone agreed. Others saw something deeper in the message: fear, desperation. The voice in that transmission was not just asking for help. It was pleading for rescue, the kind of plea that comes only when everything else has failed, and some humans understood that feeling better than anyone. The soldiers who had seen war, the veterans who remembered the price of peace, the explorers who had walked through death zones on other planets, they recognized that voice. It was the same voice humanity had once cried with during its darkest hours. Earth had been weak once, long ago. Civilizations had risen and fallen. Empires had burned. Humanity had almost destroyed itself more than once. But each time it rose again, with stronger, wiser, and more united. Humans had turned their own planet from chaos into a world of resilience. They had built cities from rubble, drawn strength from pain, and created hope from ashes. That was who they were, survivors of a death world. So when they heard that desperate signal, humanity remembered. They remembered the faces of their ancestors who had fought against impossible odds. They remembered the hunger that had driven them to innovate, the wars that had forced them to change, the fires that had tested their spirit. And in that memory they found their answer. The debates grew louder. Politicians still argued for patience, scientists wanted more data, and philosophers questioned whether humans should interfere at all. But outside those rooms, in the deep halls of the Space Defense Command, another kind of discussion was already happening. Military strategists, admirals, and ship captains were reviewing coordinates, fleet readiness, and supply lines. They understood something simple. If that alien race was truly in danger, they didn't have time for talk. Every second wasted could mean another city destroyed, another child lost. One admiral stood in front of a holographic map of the galaxy, staring at the faint blinking point that marked the origin of the signal. "They're too far to wait for diplomacy," he said quietly. "By the time politicians finish talking, there will be no one left to save." His words spread through the command center, and decisions began to take shape. Humanity had built ships capable of crossing stars, enormous vessels armed not just for exploration, but for defense. They were symbols of human power and endurance, floating fortresses that could carry hope or destruction depending on the mission. This time they would carry both. When the order finally came from the Global Council, it was short and clear. Respond. Across the solar system, shipyards came alive. Engines roared to life, factories ran day and night, and soldiers prepared for departure. The fleets that had once been meant for defense now gathered in orbit, forming a massive armada that cast shadows across the earth below. On every ship painted across the steel hulls, one word glowed in bold letters: response. It was humanity's answer to the cry for help. Not empty promises, not political speeches, action. From the moon to Mars, people watched the fleet preparing to leave. News channels broadcasted the event live, showing ships rising from launch bays like silver giants. Some people wept with pride. Others trembled with fear, wondering what awaited them beyond the stars. But deep down, every human knew this was who they were. When someone called for help, humans answered. There was something deeply symbolic about it. A race that had once prayed for help itself was now the one being prayed to. Once humanity had looked to the heavens asking for salvation. Now it was the hand reaching back. But this hand was not gentle. It was strong, forged by centuries of struggle. The aliens who had sent that message might not realize it yet. But the help that was coming to them would not be soft or quiet. It would arrive like a storm. The day the fleet departed, the skies above Earth glowed with the light of burning engines. The sound of thunder rolled across continents as the first wave of ships lifted into orbit. Families gathered outside to watch the streaks of light rise upward, disappearing into the dark. Children waved, believing they were watching heroes leave for a great adventure. Soldiers aboard the ship stood silently, knowing that beyond the beauty of the stars lay war. Inside the command ship, the fleet's commander stood before a wide observation window, looking down at the planet that had created them, a planet of oceans, storms, and endless endurance. "We were born on a world that tried to kill us every day," he said quietly to his crew. "And we survived. Now someone out there is facing what we once faced. Let's show them what it means to be human." The engines flared brighter. The fleet aligned in formation, and then, with a roar that shook the silence of space, they jumped into the void. Back on Earth, the signal that had started it all still played quietly in the background of the Space Communication Center. The alien voice repeated its desperate plea again and again. "Please, someone help us." But now, somewhere across the galaxy, humanity was already on its way. The message had been answered, not with words, but with fire and steel. For those who had sent the call, help was coming. But they didn't yet know the kind of help they had called upon. They would soon learn that the humans were not like other species. They were Deathworlders, born from struggle, trained by disaster, and guided by the belief that peace was something earned through power. As the Earth grew smaller behind the departing fleet, one truth echoed through every ship. Humanity had been weak once, but not anymore. They had learned that mercy without strength meant nothing. And now, as they raced through the stars toward a dying world, every soldier, pilot, and commander knew exactly what their mission meant. They were not going to negotiate. They were not going to reason. They were going to answer a prayer, the only way humanity knew how, with fire and fury. When the human fleet reached the dying alien world, everything changed in an instant. The invaders who had been destroying cities and enslaving people suddenly looked up and saw something they had never seen before. The night sky split open with light as massive human warships entered orbit. They came out of the void like a storm, hundreds of ships, black and silver, glowing with fire from their engines. The silence of the heavens was broken by thunder. Humanity had arrived. For days, the invaders had ruled the planet without fear. They had crushed every defense, burned every city, and laughed at the cries of those who begged for mercy. They thought they were unstoppable, that no one could challenge them. But when the human ships appeared above the atmosphere, that confidence turned to fear. Sensors on the ground went wild, showing hundreds of targets. Commanders shouted orders trying to prepare their defenses, but it was already too late. The first human strike came without warning. From orbit, the warships fired beams of burning light that tore through the clouds and hit the surface like falling suns. Entire enemy fortresses vanished in seconds. Shockwaves rolled across mountains, and the air itself seemed to scream. The invaders, who had expected another easy victory, were suddenly fighting against something far beyond their understanding. They had faced armies before, but never humans. The human ships moved with deadly precision. Every target was marked, every shot perfectly timed. Drones swarmed through the air like a metallic storm, scanning, locking, destroying. The invaders tried to return fire, but their weapons barely reached the edges of the atmosphere. Their missiles were shot down before they even left the ground. Their fleets in orbit were wiped out in minutes, their command centers silenced one by one. Down on the planet, the alien civilians, the victims who had prayed for rescue, watched from their ruined shelters. The sky above them glowed red and orange, filled with flashes of explosions. It was beautiful and horrifying all at once. The sound of the bombardment was endless, a constant roar that shook the earth. To them, it felt like the end of the world. They had prayed for salvation, but what they saw was destruction on a scale they had never imagined. And then, through the smoke and fire, came the soldiers. Human dropships descended from the sky like falling stars. Their hulls glowed with heat as they broke through the atmosphere, leaving trails of fire behind them. They landed with the force of meteors, dust rising in giant clouds. When the hatches opened, armored figures stepped out, tall, silent, and unstoppable. Their armor was black and heavy, their visors glowing faint blue. They moved like shadows, calm and focused, carrying weapons that hummed with deadly energy. They didn't shout. They didn't hesitate. They moved in formation, advancing through ruined streets where the invaders had once walked proudly. Every step they took was calculated. Every movement had purpose. Where the invaders fired wildly, humans answered with precision. Their bullets and plasma beams tore through enemy armor like paper. For the invaders, panic spread like wildfire. They had never seen soldiers like this, beings who fought with no fear, who never stopped, who seemed to know the battlefield better than anyone else. Human soldiers didn't rely on brute force alone. They used strategy, coordination, and speed. They fought as one, their every motion part of a larger plan. Civilians hiding in underground tunnels could hear the sounds of the battle, the sharp bursts of gunfire, the rumble of explosions, the strange hum of alien energy weapons. They could also hear the short, firm voices of the human soldiers giving orders through comms, speaking calmly even in chaos. It was terrifying and awe-inspiring. The invaders had come like monsters. The humans came like gods of war. One alien family peeked out of their shelter when the noise began to fade. What they saw didn't seem real. Human soldiers were walking through the ruins, checking for survivors. Behind them, the bodies of the invaders lay scattered. Smoke rose from the ground and fire burned across the horizon. The humans moved through it all with quiet discipline, scanning every corner, rescuing civilians where they could, and marking areas for evacuation. To the survivors, it was hard to understand. This was supposed to be a rescue, but it looked like the end of everything. The sky still burned, the ground still shook. But slowly they realized the destruction wasn't meant for them. It was for their enemies. Every explosion, every strike, every flash of fire had a purpose: to wipe out the invaders completely, to make sure they would never return. Humanity wasn't saving just a planet. They were sending a message. From orbit, the command ship coordinated every attack. On its bridge, officers monitored the battle like a grand, deadly chess game. They didn't rejoice in the destruction. Their faces were cold and serious. They knew what they were doing was necessary. Mercy had no place in war, not when innocent lives had already been burned. One commander whispered under his breath as another city-sized fortress was reduced to ashes. "This is what they asked for. This is how we answer." The battle didn't last long. The invaders who tried to flee found themselves trapped, their ships destroyed, their bases annihilated. Within a day, the war that had ravaged the alien planet for months was over. The human fleet had done what no one thought possible. They had turned a hopeless fight into victory. But it was a victory carved from fire and steel. When the last enemy stronghold fell silent, the bombardment stopped. Smoke rose into the upper atmosphere, drifting slowly across the planet like a morning veil. The human soldiers stood among the ruins, silent. Around them, the aliens who had been hiding began to emerge, trembling, their eyes wide with disbelief. They looked at the humans not as saviors, but as something far greater and far more terrifying. The humans offered them water, food, and safety. Their medics began treating the wounded. But the survivors couldn't stop staring at the soldiers' armor, at the ships in the sky, at the ground still glowing from the heat of battle. These were not gentle rescuers. They were a force of nature. For generations, those survivors would remember that day. The day their prayers were answered. The day the sky turned red, and salvation came wrapped in thunder. They had been saved, yes, but the image of that rescue would forever live in their memories. The sound of human ships entering orbit, the flash of burning light, the way the invaders vanished as if erased by divine power. It was not a rescue as they imagined. It was something greater and far more terrible. The humans didn't just fight the invaders, and they erased them. Every trace, every outpost, every ship was destroyed. The planet was cleansed completely. For the humans, it was justice. For the survivors, it was awe and fear mixed together. When the dust settled, the alien world was silent once more. Cities lay in ruins, but the enemy was gone. Above them, the human ships floated quietly, their mission complete. The fleet did not celebrate. They only observed. For them, this was not glory. It was duty. The aliens who had sent that desperate message months ago had been heard. Humanity had answered their call. But their answer had come in a form no one expected, with thunder, fire, and fury that burned across the heavens. And as the survivors looked up at the sky, they finally understood why the galaxy whispered about Earth. When Deathworlders arrive, salvation and destruction walk hand in hand. When the battle was finally over, a heavy silence spread across the planet. The explosions stopped, the sky no longer burned, and the thunder of warships faded into distant hums. What remained was a world buried under ash. The ground was cracked and scorched. Smoke rose from the ruins of cities that once stood tall and bright. The air was thick with dust and grief, carrying the smell of burnt metal and broken dreams. Every breath the survivors took felt heavy, like breathing through sorrow itself. From the shadows of destroyed buildings, the alien survivors slowly began to emerge. Their faces were pale, eyes wide, bodies trembling. They had lived through hell and didn't yet understand if it was truly over. The sound of human engines still echoed in the distance, and for a moment they wondered, were they truly saved, or was this just another beginning of destruction? Above them, the great human ships hovered silently. Their lights flickered through the smoke, casting long shadows across the ruined landscape. From those ships, smaller craft descended, landing carefully among the debris. But this time there were no weapons firing, no thunder or flames. The hatches opened and humans stepped out carrying boxes, not guns, supplies, not bombs. The soldiers who had come to destroy now came to rebuild. They carried food, water, medicine, and tools. Giant machines rolled out from their ships, machines that could clear rubble, purify air, and rebuild homes faster than any alien technology the survivors had ever seen. The humans set up medical tents, generators, and clean shelters. They moved with quiet purpose, helping the wounded, rescuing those trapped under fallen buildings and distributing rations to the hungry. But even as they helped, the survivors could not stop trembling. Whenever a human soldier walked by, they flinched. They could still hear the echoes of the battle, the roars of engines, the screams of the dying, the earth shaking under human firepower. To them, these same beings who now offered bread and medicine were the ones who had filled the skies with death. They wanted to say thank you, but the words came out weak, their voices shaking. It was strange for them to see such power used to protect instead of destroy. The humans moved through the ruins quietly, their faces hidden behind visors darkened by ash. They didn't speak much. They didn't boast about victory or smile in pride. They simply worked, cleaning, building, healing. They treated the aliens gently, but their silence carried something heavy, a weight that could not be seen but was deeply felt. The alien children were the first to approach. Their small eyes looked up with curiosity instead of fear. They watched as human engineers repaired a broken water system, making clean water flow again. When one of the children reached out a hand, A human soldier knelt down, removing his glove to show a bare hand. Rough, scarred, but kind. The child hesitated, then touched it. For the first time there was no fear, just quiet understanding. But for most adults the fear remained. They whispered among themselves at night, sitting around the few fires that still burned. "They saved us," one said softly, "but they destroyed everything to do it." Another replied, "Maybe that's what saving means to them." They didn't know how to feel. Gratitude mixed with terror. Relief tangled with unease. The human commanders understood that feeling. They had seen it before. Across countless worlds they had answered cries for help, and every time it ended the same way. Salvation came at a cost. They stood among the ruins, their armor scratched and blackened, their faces stained with dust and sweat. They looked around at the destruction their fleet had caused, the broken buildings, the silent streets, the empty skies. They knew this was the price of victory. None of them celebrated. There were no cheers, no victory speeches, no music. The battlefield was too quiet for joy. The commanders gathered with their officers near the remains of what had once been a great alien capital. The wind blew softly, carrying the faint sound of crying from the shelters below. One commander removed his helmet and looked at the horizon, a line of gray ash stretching as far as the eye could see. "We saved them," one officer said quietly. The commander nodded, his voice low. "Yes, but look at the cost." For humans, this feeling was not new. They had learned long ago that peace was never free. It had to be fought for, defended, and sometimes paid for in fire. They had lived through their own wars, their own near extinctions. They had rebuilt their world from ruins just like this one. They knew that sometimes to protect the innocent you had to destroy the guilty completely. There was no other way. But still, standing there among the ruins, even the most hardened soldiers felt the weight of what they had done. They didn't regret saving the aliens, but they wished it could have been gentler. Yet deep down they knew it couldn't. Humanity's way of bringing peace was not through soft words or small acts. It was through overwhelming power. Because that was the only language evil ever understood. The survivors watched as human engineers built a great beacon on the edge of the city. It would serve as a symbol of renewal, a light in the darkness. Around it they planted the first seeds of green life, brought from human worlds. The machines worked day and night, repairing what they could, creating shelters and clearing the ashes of war. Slowly the planet began to breathe again, but the survivors could not forget. Every time they looked at the sky they remembered how it had burned red. Every time they heard the hum of a human ship, their hearts raced in fear before calming again. Gratitude lived side by side with unease. They owed their lives to humanity, yet they could never fully trust them. The human soldiers, on the other hand, never asked for thanks. They didn't want it. They didn't need it. They didn't see themselves as heroes, only as protectors doing what had to be done. When the last city was secured and the survivors were safe, the human commander gave a final order to his troops. Help them rebuild, then move on. There will be others who need us. As the days passed, the planet began to change. Smoke thinned. The air grew clearer. Children laughed again, though quietly at first. Hope slowly returned, fragile but real. And through it all, the humans remained calm and distant, like shadows watching from the edge of the light. For the alien survivors, it became a story to tell their children, how salvation came not as light from heaven but as fire from the sky. They would remember the faces of the humans, eyes that held sorrow, strength, and a kind of sadness that only those who had known endless struggle could carry. When the human fleet finally prepared to leave, the aliens gathered to watch. They wanted to say thank you, though the words still trembled on their lips. As the ships lifted off, the ground rumbled softly. Dust rose once again, and the survivors shielded their eyes. They watched until the sky cleared and the stars returned. The invaders were gone. The humans were gone. Only peace remained, a quiet, uneasy peace built from ashes. But somewhere in their hearts, the survivors understood something new. They had been saved by beings who had mastered both compassion and destruction, and though it frightened them, they knew one truth would stay with them forever. Peace is never gentle. For humanity, peace was not a gift. It was something earned, something fought for, something that rose only after fire. And as the last echo of the human engines faded into the night, the survivors whispered softly into the wind. They came with fury, but they gave us life. Word of what happened spread faster than light. Across every planet, every space station, and every communication channel, the same story was told again and again. The story of the humans. No one could stop talking about it. At first, it was just rumors. A distant world had been attacked, and the native species had sent a desperate signal for help. And then, the Deathworlders had answered. Whole civilizations stopped to listen. In shining cities made of glass and deep colonies hidden under alien suns, leaders gathered to hear the reports. The details were different depending on who told them, but one thing was always the same. Humanity came, and everything changed. Some called them heroes. They said the humans had done what no one else dared to do. They had stood against a powerful invader and saved an entire species from extinction. These people described them as protectors of the weak, guardians of justice, and symbols of courage. They showed images of human ships blocking enemy fire, of soldiers pulling survivors from burning cities, of medics helping alien children. To them, humanity was a light in the darkness, fierce, unstoppable, but good. But not everyone agreed. Others saw the same story in a completely different way. To them, the humans were not saviors. They were monsters, unstoppable beings of war who brought as much destruction as they prevented. They spoke of how the humans' weapons had turned entire battlefields into wastelands, how cities were erased from existence in the name of protection, and how the ground still burned long after the war was over. They said that wherever the Deathworlders went, peace might come, but it always came with fire. Across the galaxy, the argument grew. Were the humans angels or demons? Protectors or destroyers? Some said they were both. Others said they were something entirely new, a force of nature that could not be judged by normal standards. Because to humans, peace and war were not opposites. They were two sides of the same thing. Every species that heard the story learned one truth, something they could never forget. When Deathworlders and the humans answered a cry for help, they didn't come with flowers or promises. They didn't send diplomats or negotiators. They came with fleets. They came with weapons that glowed brighter than suns. They came not with hope alone, but with vengeance, cold, focused, and terrifying. The story spread with every passing day. Some alien children whispered about it in school, imagining the mighty human soldiers covered in black armor, eyes burning with purpose. Merchants discussed it in spaceports, wondering if it was wise to ever ask for humanity's aid. And governments? They debated in secret rooms, trying to decide whether humanity was a threat or a blessing. For the species that had been saved, things were never the same again. They had been given a second chance, their cities rebuilt, their people alive, their enemies defeated. But when they looked up at the stars, they didn't just see safety anymore. They saw power, human power, power that could save or destroy, depending on how it was used. They remembered the sight of human ships blotting out the sky, the sound of their weapons roaring like thunder, and the cold silence that followed. They remembered how easily the invaders had been crushed, and how close their own world had come to joining them in ruin. They had survived, yes, but survival now meant something different. To them, mercy no longer meant kindness. It meant strength. It meant sacrifice. It meant doing whatever was necessary, no matter how painful, to ensure life continued. Humanity had shown them that sometimes mercy does not come with gentle hands. Sometimes mercy wears the face of war. The rescued species told their story to anyone who would listen. They saved us, they said. But when they came, the stars themselves trembled. They spoke of human fleets that moved like storms, of soldiers who never hesitated, of commanders who stared into chaos without fear. They told of the moment the humans arrived, not as messengers of peace, but as avengers of the helpless. Other civilizations listened carefully. Some were inspired. They sent envoys to Earth hoping to form alliances. They saw humanity as the ultimate shield against tyranny, but others grew afraid. They began to build their defenses, whispering warnings to their people. Do not anger the Deathworlders. Do not ask for their help unless you are ready for what comes with it. Because the humans had proven something the galaxy had long forgotten. That true peace often demands a terrible price. Among the stars, stories became legends. Pilots told tales of how human ships could enter battles where no one else dared to go. Traders spoke of human marines who fought even after their armor was shattered, refusing to fall. Scholars debated how a species from a so-called death world, a planet so dangerous that everything tried to kill you, could become the most powerful protectors in the galaxy. And in every story, one phrase was always repeated, whispered like a warning, passed from one world to another. If you call for help, be sure you're ready for humanity to answer. Those words became a proverb among the stars. It was spoken with both respect and fear. Some said it before sending distress calls almost like a prayer. Others said it as a threat, a reminder that humanity was not to be taken lightly. Because everyone knew that if humans heard your cry, they would come. They would come fast, they would come hard, and they would not stop until the threat was gone. But when they left, your world would never be the same. Even the alien historians began writing about the event. They called it the Fire of Mercy. It was studied in academies and recorded in archives. The more they learned about humans, the more they realized that their strength came from their home, a world where only the strong, the clever, and the brave could survive. On Earth, life was struggle. Storms, predators, diseases, everything had forced humanity to evolve into survivors. And that same instinct, that same fierce will was what they carried into the stars. They didn't seek war, but when war came, they didn't fear it. They faced it. They used it. So when the humans answered that desperate call for help, they brought with them the only kind of mercy they knew, the mercy of fire, the mercy that ends pain by ending the cause of it completely. As years passed, the story became myth. New generations grew up hearing about the day humanity's fleets crossed the void, and the phrase, Death Worlders, became both feared and respected. Some civilizations prepared for the day they might need humanity's aid. Others prayed that day would never come. But deep down, everyone understood the same truth. The humans were different. They weren't conquerors, yet their power was unmatched. They weren't destroyers, yet their wars reshaped worlds. And they weren't gods, but to many they felt like it. Beings who carried both hope and destruction in their hands. In the quiet corners of the galaxy, old leaders would sometimes gaze up at the stars and whisper to themselves, "If we ever fall, will the Death Worlders come for us too?" And the answer, known to all, was simple and chilling. Yes, they would, but you must be ready. Because when humanity answers a cry for help, they don't come to negotiate. They come to end the threat. They come to protect. They come to make sure no one else will ever suffer again. And though they bring peace, that peace is written in fire.